At 68 years old, Samuel Carter had become a shadow in the bustling streets of Queens, a gaunt figure with a tangled gray beard, clutching a tattered military duffel bag that once bore the proud insignia of the U.S. Army. For over a decade, he'd been homeless, a quiet ghost who scavenged cans for pennies and slept in the doorways of shuttered shops. The locals called him the Silent Vet, a man who never begged, never caused trouble, but whose hollow eyes told a story no one dared to ask about. Yet, beneath the grime and sorrow, Samuel carried a past of courage, a past that would soon unravel in a courtroom, leaving everyone speechless. Samuel had served 22 years in the Army, retiring honorably in 2003, only to lose everything when his beloved wife, Evelyn, succumbed to leukemia in 2007. A tragedy compounded by a misdiagnosis at the VA hospital that shattered his trust in the system. Grief-stricken, he turned away from his family, donated their savings to a children's hospital Evelyn adored, and vanished into the streets of New York. It's easier to be invisible than to carry the weight of failure, he once whispered to a shelter worker on a frigid December evening, the icy wind biting at his frostbitten fingertips. That night, with hunger gnawing at his stomach after 4 days without food, Samuel slipped into Rossi's mini-mart, his trembling hands tucking a stale loaf of bread under his coat. But a newly installed security camera caught the act. "Thief!" shouted Mr. Rossi, the store owner, as he dialed 911, while Samuel stood frozen, the bread bulging in his jacket, his weathered face a mask of resignation. Stay with us as we uncover a story of sacrifice, loss, and redemption that will tug at your heartstrings and remind you of the heroes who walk among us, unseen. If you love stories that honor courage, gratitude, and the resilience of the human spirit, join us on this journey. Subscribe now to Daily Narrated Stories, and let's celebrate the sacrifices of those who've served together. Samuel's trembling hands betrayed his desperation as he stood in Rossi's mini-mart, the bread still visible in his coat, the faint scent of yeast mingling with the stale air of the shop. "I just needed to survive another night," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the hum of the store's heater, his breath fogging in the chilly air. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived, their boots echoing on the linoleum floor. The younger one, Officer Daniels, hesitated as he cuffed Samuel's frail wrists, noticing the faded dog tags around his neck, the metal cold against Samuel's weathered skin. "You a veteran?" Daniels asked, squinting at the worn engraving, his voice tinged with unease. Samuel nodded faintly, his eyes distant. "I was once. Not anymore." Daniels sighed, his tone softening with reluctant sympathy. "I'm sorry, sir, but Mr. Rossi's pressing charges. We have to take you in." Samuel didn't resist. He'd long accepted the indifference of the world around him, his shoulders slumping under the weight of yet another betrayal. At the precinct, Samuel was processed with the cold efficiency reserved for petty criminals, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on his gaunt face. His public defender, a harried young woman named Clara, skimmed through his file, her eyes flicking impatiently to her watch, more focused on her caseload than his story. The next morning, Samuel was led into Queens Municipal Courtroom 3, his clothes still soiled from a night in holding, the scent of damp concrete clinging to him like a second skin. The gallery was sparse. Overworked lawyers, a few journalists chasing bigger stories, and court staff shuffling papers with mechanical precision. No one was there for Samuel, no family to offer a reassuring glance, no friends to speak on his behalf. Case number 52187, State versus Samuel Carter. The clerk droned, her voice monotone, as if reading a grocery list. The prosecutor, a sharp-faced man named Ethan Brooks, adjusted his glasses with a practiced flick. "Your Honor, the defendant was caught stealing a loaf of bread from Rossi's mini-mart. Given his history of petty theft and lack of residence, we recommend detention until trial." Judge Sullivan, a man known for his brisk rulings, barely looked up from the file, his pen scratching notes with a rhythm that suggested this was just another case to clear from his docket. The courtroom had already written Samuel off, just another faceless drifter in an endless cycle of petty crime and punishment. "How do you plead, Mr. Carter?" Judge Sullivan asked, his tone flat as he finally met Samuel's gaze, his piercing blue eyes scanning the disheveled man before him. "Guilty, Your Honor," Samuel replied, his voice a hoarse whisper, the words heavy with defeat. "I was starving." A stifled laugh echoed from the gallery, a cruel ripple of sound that made Samuel flinch, but Judge Sullivan's sharp glance silenced it, his jaw tightening with disapproval. He turned back to the file, his fingers flipping through the pages. "Samuel James Carter, former Staff Sergeant, United States Army." The judge froze, his fingers tightening around the folder's edge, the paper crinkling under his grip. His face drained of color as he reread the name, then looked at Samuel, really looked at him. For the first time, his gaze tracing the lines of a face he hadn't seen in over 2 decades. The courtroom stilled, sensing the shift, the air growing thick with unspoken questions. Judge Sullivan stood abruptly, an unusual move for a routine hearing, his chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor, the sound jarring in the sudden silence. The prosecutor stammered, "Your Honor," his voice tinged with confusion, but Sullivan raised a hand, his expression unreadable. "This court will take a 20-minute recess," he announced, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't quite mask. "The defendant will remain." As he exited to his chambers, his robes billowing behind him, whispers buzzed through the room like a swarm of bees, but Samuel kept his eyes on the floor, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, unaware of the storm his name had just unleashed. In his chambers, Judge Sullivan's hand shook as he opened a locked drawer, the key rattling against the metal, pulling out a faded photograph. Soldiers in desert camouflage, standing outside a medical tent in Afghanistan. 2002, the harsh sun casting long shadows on the sand. There he was, a 24-year-old medic, his face boyish and unscarred. And in the back row, a younger Samuel Carter, his posture proud despite the exhaustion etched into his features, a faint smile playing on his lips. Sullivan logged into a military database, his fingers flying over the keyboard, the screen's blue glow illuminating his tense face. Samuel's record confirmed his suspicions. 3 tours, 2 in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, working in logistics, ensuring supplies reached the front lines during the deadliest missions, his courage a lifeline in the chaos of war. In 2002, Samuel earned a Silver Star for bravery after single-handedly rescuing a stranded unit under fire, dragging a burning ammo crate away from injured soldiers despite shrapnel tearing into his shoulder. The searing pain, nothing compared to the lives he saved. 14 soldiers who would see another sunrise because of him. A news clipping from 2003 showed Samuel cradling a wounded Iraqi boy during a relief mission, his strong arms a shield against the violence around them. An image that briefly made him a symbol of hope before the world moved on to the next headline. But what stopped Sullivan cold was a declassified report from August 2002, the words on the screen blurring as his eyes filled with tears. During a frantic evacuation under heavy enemy fire, Samuel had carried a wounded medic, Private First Class Henry Sullivan, 3 miles to a medevac chopper, ignoring his own injuries, the jagged shrapnel in his leg burning with every step, his breath ragged as he whispered encouragements to the young medic fading in his arms. "My God," Sullivan whispered, his voice breaking, "it's really him." For 20 years, he'd searched for the man who saved his life, knowing only the name Carter shouted amidst the chaos of war, the sound of gunfire and screams drowning out all but that single word. Now, that man stood in his courtroom, broken by the very country he'd served, his once strong frame diminished by years of neglect. Meanwhile, Samuel sat in the courtroom, ignored by the bailiff who scrolled on his phone, the light from the screen casting a cold glow on his bored expression. For 16 years, Samuel had been a ghost, his life unraveling after Evelyn's death, the memory of her final moments haunting him like a relentless specter. The night Evelyn passed replayed in Samuel's mind with cruel clarity, the sterile scent of antiseptic stinging his nose, the beep of the heart monitor slowing, then flatlining, her hand growing cold in his as he sat by her hospital bed. Helpless. "I'll fix this, Evie," he'd whispered, tears blurring his vision. Knowing he couldn't, the weight of his failure crushing him as the room filled with the silence of her absence. The VA's misdiagnosis of her leukemia had shattered him. An untreated pity deepened his despair, the nightmares of war blending with the grief of losing her. He'd abandoned his pension, his benefits, everything, unable to face a system that failed the woman he loved most, the bureaucracy a maze he couldn't navigate through his pain. On the streets, Samuel's life had been a slow descent into oblivion. Residents saw him as a nuisance. Teenagers pelted him with soda cans, the sticky liquid dripping down his coat as they laughed. Shopkeepers sprayed water on the sidewalks where he slept, the icy spray soaking through his thin jacket, and even other homeless folks avoided the man who woke screaming from nightmares of war, his cries echoing in the empty alleys. He survived on what he could scavenge, never begging, his military discipline keeping him stoic even as his body weakened, his cough worsening with each brutal winter. On the worst nights, when the cold seeped into his bones, Samuel would pull out Evelyn's photo, her smile preserved in a Ziploc bag, the plastic crinkling under his trembling fingers. "I'm trying, Evie," he'd whisper, his breath fogging in the air, "just a little longer." Back in his chambers, Sullivan made urgent calls. First to the VA to verify Samuel's records, the hold music a maddening loop as he paced, then to Colonel David Harper, a mutual comrade from their Afghanistan days, his voice urgent. "David, it's Henry Sullivan. I found him, the man who saved me in Kandahar. He's in my courtroom, charged with stealing bread." Harper's silence spoke volumes, the weight of the revelation hanging between them. "I'm 4 hours out," he replied, his tone resolute. "Keep him there." Sullivan scribbled a note on official letterhead, the pen scratching furiously. "Samuel Carter is a testament to loyalty, abandoned by the nation he defended. Ethics barred him from dismissing the case outright due to their personal connection, but he'd ensure justice took a new path, his determination a fire in his chest." As the recess ended, the court clerk found a document on her desk, a copy of the 2003 news photo of Samuel with the Iraqi boy, the child's grateful eyes meeting Samuel's steady gaze, with a note in Harper's handwriting. "Some heroes fade into the shadows, but their light never dims." The pieces were falling into place. Samuel wasn't just a defendant. He was a man whose bravery had touched lives, including those now deciding his fate. When court resumed, Samuel sensed the change immediately. Sullivan's stern demeanor had softened into something unfamiliar. Reverence, perhaps, or recognition. His eyes lingering on Samuel with a warmth that felt foreign after years of being invisible. Before Samuel could process it, Sullivan spoke, his voice carrying a new weight. "In light of new evidence about the defendant's history, this court will delay proceedings pending further investigation. The defendant will remain in custody until tomorrow's hearing." The prosecutor, Brooks, blinked in confusion, his carefully prepared argument unraveling, but he didn't object. Samuel nodded, accustomed to being a pawn in systems beyond his control, his fate always decided by others. As he was led away, Sullivan added, his voice firm but kind, "Ensure Mr. Carter receives a hot meal and a medical evaluation tonight." The words a small lifeline in the storm of Samuel's life. That evening, a local blog posted a cynical headline. "Homeless man claims veteran status. Judge postpones sentencing for bread theft." The comments were brutal, each word a dagger. Another fake vet looking for sympathy. One read, the venom seeping through the screen. In the holding cell, a young inmate, fueled by the article, confronted Samuel, his eyes blazing with anger. "My cousin died in Iraq, and you're out here pretending to be a hero?" he snarled, shoving Samuel against the wall, the concrete cold and unyielding against his back. Samuel didn't fight back, absorbing the blow as he had so many others, his body accustomed to pain, his spirit too weary to resist. That night he sat in the dim cell, the flickering light casting shadows on the walls. Clutching Evelyn's photo and his dog tags, the metal warm from his grip, wondering why, after all this time, someone had finally seen him, the question a quiet ache in his chest. The next morning, Samuel returned to a transformed courtroom, the air buzzing with anticipation. The gallery was packed, whispers buzzing like static, the seats filled with curious onlookers and reporters craning their necks for a glimpse of the man at the center of the drama. News vans lined the street outside, barred from filming but eager for the story, their antennas piercing the gray sky. Samuel's public defender had been replaced by a silver-haired attorney, Edward Langston, from the Veterans Justice Network, his suit impeccable, his demeanor calm and reassuring. "You've got someone in your corner now, Mr. Carter," Langston said with a nod, his voice steady, a lifeline Samuel hadn't expected. As Samuel sat, the doors swung open with a heavy creak, and 3 officers in dress uniforms entered behind the bailiff, their medals glinting in the morning light. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Henry Sullivan," the bailiff announced, the formality starkly different from the day before, the words carrying a weight that filled the room. Sullivan's gaze lingered on Samuel, a flicker of emotion breaking through his judicial mask, a silent promise in his eyes. "Before addressing the charges against Mr. Carter, the court will hear testimony relevant to his background," Sullivan declared, his voice resonant, commanding the room's attention. Colonel David Harper took the stand, his medals gleaming under the courtroom lights, his posture ramrod straight, a testament to years of service. "I am Colonel David Harper, stationed at Fort Drum. I served with Staff Sergeant Samuel Carter in Afghanistan in 2002. He began, his voice steady but thick with gratitude, each word a tribute. He turned to Samuel, his eyes locking onto the older man's, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. "This man saved 14 lives during an ambush in Kandahar. Under enemy fire, he dragged a burning ammo crate away from our position, suffering severe burns but preventing a blast that would have killed us all." The gallery murmured in awe, the sound a soft wave rolling through the room. Harper continued, his voice gaining strength. He later carried a wounded medic, Private First Class Henry Sullivan, 3 miles to safety, despite shrapnel in his leg, his own blood soaking into the sand with every step. All eyes turned to Sullivan, whose composure faltered, a single tear escaping as he nodded, confirming the story, the weight of that day crashing over him anew. Brooks, the prosecutor, shifted uncomfortably, his confidence shaken. "Your Honor, while this speaks to the defendant's past, it doesn't negate the theft." Harper cut in, his tone sharp, brooking no argument. "If I may, Your Honor, we've uncovered a critical error. Due to a 2007 database glitch, Samuel Carter's pension and benefits were terminated after he failed to respond to mail sent to an old address. He's owed $1,450 monthly for 16 years, over $278,000, plus medical care for service-related injuries." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of the injustice sinking in, a collective intake of breath echoing in the stillness. Samuel's hands gripped the table, his knuckles white, the numbers swirling in his mind, a fortune he'd never known he was entitled to. Harper produced a folder, the papers rustling as he opened it. "We also have statements from 6 members of his unit, including General Thompson, who credits Samuel with saving his daughter's life during that same ambush." Sullivan addressed Samuel directly, his voice cutting through the tension. "Mr. Carter, please approach the bench." Samuel rose, his knees trembling, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Sullivan's voice softened, a rare vulnerability breaking through. "Ethics would typically bar me from presiding over this case due to our personal connection. I didn't recognize you yesterday, but your file revealed you as the man who saved my life in Afghanistan. I've spent 20 years trying to thank you. I only knew you as Carter in the chaos." A gasp rippled through the gallery, the sound a wave of shock and awe. Sullivan removed his glasses, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, his formal demeanor melting away. "You did more than your duty, and this nation has failed you," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, each word a confession and a promise. Turning to Brooks, he asked, his tone firm, "Does the state wish to proceed?" Brooks, visibly moved, his own eyes misty, replied, "Your Honor, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Carter with prejudice." "So ordered," Sullivan said swiftly, the gavel strike a definitive end to Samuel's ordeal. "Mr. Carter, you are free to go. This court apologizes for the broader miscarriage of justice you've endured." Samuel stood motionless, the words barely registering, his mind a whirlwind of disbelief, until the doors opened again with a soft creak. A woman in her 40s, tears streaming down her face, approached, her steps hesitant but determined. "Uncle Samuel," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "I'm Laura, Evelyn's niece. We've been searching for you for years." Samuel's stoic facade crumbled, his shoulders sagging as Laura embraced him, the first kind touch he'd felt in over a decade, her warmth a balm to his battered soul. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed, their microphones thrust toward Colonel Harper, who stood tall, his voice firm. "This isn't just about one veteran," he declared, his words a rallying cry. "This is about thousands like Samuel Carter who fall through the cracks of a system they defended. Today, we start making this right." By afternoon, the story had gone viral. News helicopters hovering over the courthouse, their blades slicing through the air as Samuel emerged, clean-shaven and wearing donated clothes, the fabric soft against his skin, a stark contrast to the rags he'd worn for years. He was flanked by Colonel Harper and Judge Sullivan, now recused but present as a private citizen, his hand resting lightly on Samuel's shoulder. Mr. Rossi, the store owner, pushed through the crowd, his face pale with shame. "I didn't know," he said, his voice trembling. "I saw you as just another troublemaker. I'm so ashamed." Samuel simply nodded, too overwhelmed to speak, his throat tight with emotion. Within 48 hours, a veterans organization established a fund for Samuel that soared past $250,000 in donations, the generosity a tidal wave of support. Social media erupted with stories of other veterans lost to bureaucratic failures, prompting the VA to announce a sweeping review of terminated benefits cases, a promise of change sparked by Samuel's story. In a quiet moment away from the cameras, Sullivan finally had the conversation he'd waited 20 years for, the two men sitting in a small park near the courthouse, the autumn leaves crunching under their feet. "You carried me for 3 miles with shrapnel in your leg," Sullivan said softly, his voice thick with gratitude, the memory as vivid as if it were yesterday. "The medics said you refused treatment until they stabilized me." Samuel shrugged, his eyes on the ground, the grass a soft green beneath his worn boots. "You were worse off than me. I did what I had to." Sullivan shook his head, a small smile breaking through. "You said something to me that day when I was fading in and out. You said, 'Keep breathing, kid. Your story's not done.' Those words kept me alive, kept me fighting. I became a judge because I wanted to serve, like you did." Samuel looked at Sullivan, seeing not the judge in robes but the scared young medic from his memories, his face pale and bloodied in the desert heat. "I'm glad something good came out of that day," Samuel said, his voice rough but warm. "Not just something good," Sullivan replied, his hand gripping Samuel's shoulder. "Everything good in my life, my career, my family, my chance to make a difference. It all exists because you didn't leave me behind." For the first time in years, Samuel smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes, the warmth spreading through him like sunlight. "No man left behind," he said softly, the words a vow he'd kept through decades of hardship. "That was never just a saying for me." 3 days later, Samuel stood in Sullivan's chambers, wearing a new suit, the fabric crisp against his skin, his military decorations finally displayed on his chest, the Silver Star, Purple Heart, and other ribbons telling the story of his service, each one a testament to his courage. A Veterans Affairs representative formally presented him with his back benefits, the check a staggering sum, along with an additional settlement for the administrative error, the amount of lifeline he'd never dreamed of. As cameras captured the moment, Samuel spoke publicly for the first time, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "I don't want anyone's pity," he said, his words carrying the weight of years of struggle. "I just hope those who come after won't be forgotten like I was." The story transformed from a local human interest piece to a national conversation about how America treats its veterans, legislators citing Samuel's case when introducing bills to reform the benefits system, his name a rallying cry for change. The photograph of Samuel carrying the Iraqi boy circulated again, this time alongside images of him homeless on Queen streets, a powerful juxtaposition that forced uncomfortable questions about national priorities. Samuel Carter, who had been invisible for 16 years, had suddenly become impossible to ignore, his story a beacon of hope and a call for justice. Samuel Carter's story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, hope can emerge from the shadows, a flickering light that refuses to be extinguished. Once a hero who carried a wounded medic to safety, Samuel became invisible, abandoned by the very nation he defended, his sacrifices buried under layers of bureaucratic neglect and societal indifference. Yet, through the power of recognition and justice, he reclaimed his dignity, his family, and his place in the world, proving that courage endures, forgiveness heals, and redemption is possible even after years of despair. Samuel's quiet strength, seen in his refusal to beg despite starvation, his unwavering love for Evelyn, and his stoic endurance through years of hardship, challenges us to look beyond appearances and honor the sacrifices of those who've served, to see the heroes who walk among us, hidden in plain sight. Let Samuel's journey inspire you to reflect on the veterans in your own life, those who've given so much for our freedom, yet often struggle in silence, their stories untold, their sacrifices forgotten. Take a moment to share your gratitude or a story of a veteran who's touched your heart in the comments below. Your words could spark hope for someone who feels invisible, just as Samuel once did, a small act of kindness that ripples outward, touching lives you may never see. At Daily Narrated Stories, we're dedicated to sharing these life-changing tales that remind us of our shared humanity and the power of compassion, stories that uplift, inspire, and remind us to never give up on doing what's right. 6 months later, Samuel settled into a modest apartment at Heroes Haven, a veterans housing community in Queens, the walls of his new home a canvas for cherished memories. A photo of Evelyn in her wedding dress hung beside a snapshot of his old unit in Afghanistan, their faces frozen in a moment of camaraderie, and a new picture with Judge Sullivan at a veterans gala, their smiles a testament to an unbreakable bond. Samuel became a quiet advocate, speaking at community centers about the challenges veterans face, his gentle honesty resonating with struggling youth, his words a bridge between past and future. Each evening, he sat in Flushing Meadows Park, watching families laugh, the sound a stark contrast to the nights he'd once shivered on those same benches, the wind cutting through his thin jacket. Outside the Queen's Courthouse, a plaque now reads, "Justice is honoring those who've been overlooked." A sculpture beside it depicts Samuel carrying the young medic who'd become Judge Sullivan, the American flag etched in the background, a symbol of a nation they both served. At its unveiling, the mayor announced the Carter Fund, a legal aid program for homeless veterans, a legacy born from Samuel's story. A 12-year-old girl who'd seen Samuel collecting cans years ago wrote a school essay that went viral, her words a quiet revelation. Some heroes don't wear capes. They wear scars and carry memories. Her essay, read at a city council meeting, spurred new policies on homelessness, her voice a reminder of the power of seeing the unseen. Samuel and Sullivan forged a lasting friendship, sharing meals at Sullivan's home, the warmth of family a comfort Samuel hadn't known in years. During one dinner, Sullivan's daughter asked, her voice curious, "Were you angry about all those years on the streets?" Samuel paused, his fork hovering over his plate, then smiled softly, the expression gentle and unburdened. "I don't hold grudges," he said, his voice steady. "I just hope the next generation remembers the ones who came before." On Memorial Day, Samuel spoke at Fort Drum in his dress uniform, his silver star gleaming, the weight of the moment grounding him. "I protected this nation once," he said, his voice strong, resonant, "and now it's protected me in return. Kindness may be delayed, but it's never lost, just waiting for the right moment." What would you do if the man who saved your life stood before you, broken and forgotten, accused of a petty crime? Don't let this story end here. Your voice matters. Subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories right now to join a community that celebrates the triumph of the human spirit, a community that honors the heroes who've shaped our world. Share this video with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Comment your thoughts, and let's keep these incredible stories alive.